In the early months of America's war in the Pacific, Japanese officers studying captured American weapons shook their heads at what they saw. The Thompson submachine gun, with its heavy frame and costly production, looked to them like a gangster's toy. When reports filtered through of a new weapon, the M3, many laughed outright. Crude, stamped from sheet metal, it seemed less like a soldier's firearm and more like a tool from a mechanic's workshop. They nicknamed it a grease gun, sneering at the resemblance to the lubrication devices found in garages. To a proud imperial army that had poured effort into its own Type 100 submachine gun, sleeker, more polished, and expensive to produce, the American weapon looked absurdly cheap. What they did not realize was that behind its unrefined exterior lay the embodiment of American wartime pragmatism. A weapon designed to be produced in vast numbers, deployed anywhere, and devastating in close combat. The M3's origins tell the story of a country that understood war was not about appearance, but output. By 1942, the Thompson, despite its battlefield success, was proving far too expensive and slow to build. American industry could turn out tanks, planes, and rifles at staggering speed, but the Thompson tied up resources with complex machining and high costs. The Ordnance Department wanted a new design, simpler, lighter, and drastically cheaper. George Hyde and Frederick Sampson answered the call, delivering a weapon that cost barely $20 to manufacture compared to the Thompson's $70 or more. Its parts could be stamped and welded in automobile factories, and its design reduced the total components by nearly half. Where the Thompson was a precision machine, the grease gun was a battlefield tool, rough, functional, and brutally effective. Japanese intelligence officers dismissed this thinking. Their Type 100, first adopted in 1940, was meticulously crafted with fine machining, carefully fitted parts, and a firing system modeled after European submachine guns. It fired the 8 Nambu cartridge at 450 rounds per minute. On paper, it seemed refined, reliable, and adequate for infantry use. Yet Japan produced fewer than 30,000 of them during the entire war, barely a fraction of what America would soon roll off its assembly lines with the grease gun. Japanese commanders, steeped in traditions of craftsmanship and elite weaponry, could not grasp the American approach. Mass over refinement, distribution over exclusivity, overwhelming fire over controlled precision. The first clashes would reveal the consequences of this divide. By 1943, Marines advancing through jungles and across island beaches began receiving shipments of the M3. Soldiers laughed at its clunky look, some preferring to keep their Thompsons or even captured Japanese weapons. But the M3's worth was proven not in how it looked, but in how it performed when inches separated life from death. In the choking foliage of Bougainville, in the pillbox-riddled sands of Saipan, and later in the hellish caves of Okinawa, the grease gun's compact frame, low recoil, and steady rate of fire made it a savage equalizer in close-quarters combat. Japanese defenders who had once mocked it would soon find themselves shredded by streams of .45 caliber rounds that ignored cover, tore through foliage, and hammered with unrelenting force. By the time the weapon had established its reputation, the sneers of Japanese officers had faded into grim respect. The grease gun had proven that appearances mattered little in a war defined by factories, logistics, and adaptability. The lesson was clear. The cheapest weapon on the battlefield could still be the deadliest, provided it was in the right hands, backed by an industrial power that knew how to fight a global war. By the summer of 1944, the U.S. Army had committed fully to the grease gun. Factories in Detroit and Grand Rapids were stamping out thousands every week, their assembly lines resembling automobile plants more than traditional armories. The philosophy was simple: equip as many men as possible with automatic firepower, no matter how inelegant the design appeared. For the infantryman stepping off a Higgins boat or crawling through a steaming jungle ravine, beauty did not matter. Survival did. The grease gun chambered the same .45 ACP cartridge as the Thompson, but its design deliberately slowed the rate of fire to around 450 rounds per minute. This deliberate pacing gave it surprising stability. Where the Thompson roared like a jackhammer, emptying a magazine in seconds, the M3 produced measured bursts that clung to a target. Soldiers soon learned that this steadiness allowed for greater control in short-range fights. A Marine clearing a dugout on Peleliu described how the weapon seemed to walk bullets across a wall, punching through bamboo and soil to flush out defenders. It lacked the theatrical drum magazines of the old Chicago typewriter, but in combat, the M3's quiet efficiency became its strength. Meanwhile, Japanese units still struggled to deploy their own submachine gun. The Type 100 remained rare, usually issued only to paratroopers or specialized assault detachments. Even when present, its weak 8mm cartridge lacked the stopping power of the American .45 round. Veterans of Guadalcanal remembered being hit by bursts from Japanese guns, only to stagger onward adrenaline-masking wounds that would have dropped a man hit by a grease gun. The contrast was stark. America armed whole squads with automatic weapons, while Japan's doctrine left most of its infantry dependent on bolt-action Arisaka rifles, weapons ill-suited for the sudden, intimate violence of jungle combat. The difference revealed itself most brutally during the island battles of 1944 and 1945. On Saipan, where caves and concrete bunkers turned every advance into a lethal puzzle, American assault teams often moved with engineers at the front, flamethrowers and grease guns working in tandem. One man sprayed suppressing fire as the other unleashed burning fuel into openings. Survivors reported that Japanese defenders dreaded the rhythmic hammer of the M3 because it preceded the searing roar of the flamethrower. Each burst of .45 fire pinned men in place, making them vulnerable to annihilation. The psychological weight of the grease gun grew as its presence spread. Soldiers described its metallic clatter as unmistakable, a sound that carried through the jungle canopy or echoed down a cave tunnel. Japanese troops, trained to hurl banzai charges in sudden eruptions of violence, found those desperate attacks shredded by steady walls of American fire. A charge that might have overwhelmed riflemen collapsed when every third soldier carried a weapon capable of pouring automatic fire. By late 1944, the Japanese had ceased mocking the grease gun. Instead, they salvaged what examples they could from the dead, desperately trying to turn the weapon against its owners. But the lesson was bitter. It was not only the weapon itself, but the system that supported it, America's factories, its logistics ships, its endless supplies of ammunition, that made the grease gun a symbol of inexhaustible force. When American forces stormed ashore at Leyte in October 1944, the grease gun made its presence felt on a grand scale. The beaches erupted with fire as U.S. soldiers and Marines pressed inland, pushing through palm groves, swampy rice paddies, and hastily dug Japanese defenses. In these chaotic landscapes, the M3 became a soldier's ally. Compact and durable, it could be carried slung across the chest, ready in an instant when an enemy soldier suddenly appeared from the tree line or leapt from a spider hole. Infantrymen appreciated how quickly the stock could be extended and how the weapon stayed effective even when caked in mud or drenched by tropical rains. The Japanese defenders, by contrast, relied heavily on entrenched rifles, light machine guns, and the occasional Type 100. The imbalance was glaring. A Type 100's 30-round magazine could unleash a fast spray of 8 bullets, but its limited numbers meant only a handful of soldiers in a company might carry one. Meanwhile, American platoons routinely advanced with half a dozen grease guns at the ready, supplemented by bars and garans. In sudden clashes, this volume of fire was overwhelming. Veterans later recalled firefights where entire Japanese units were broken apart before they could regroup, their shouts drowned by the heavy thud of American submachine guns. At Leyte, the terrain magnified these contrasts. Japanese forces used dense vegetation to conceal ambushes, attempting to lure Americans into kill zones. But the grease gun countered these tactics. Soldiers often swept suspected hiding spots with bursts before advancing, clearing brush with lead instead of waiting to be surprised. The steady .45 rounds smashed through bamboo stalks and undergrowth, making concealment less effective. Japanese accounts spoke of shock and frustration at the sheer weight of bullets pouring into positions before an ambush could even begin. The battle for Manila the following February drove the point home even further. In a city reduced to rubble, where fighting was measured in doorways and stairwells, the grease gun excelled. American infantry clearing buildings rarely paused to aim carefully. Instead, they fired in bursts through door frames, up staircases, and into darkened corners. It was a brutal, close-range fight, and the M3's compact size allowed soldiers to maneuver it easily in confined rooms. Japanese holdouts, armed mostly with rifles and grenades, were slaughtered in these sudden confrontations. Survivors later recalled the terror of automatic fire hammering through walls before a single step was taken across the threshold. The weapon's simplicity made it uniquely suited for the grind of urban war. Where Thompsons sometimes jammed from dust or debris, the M3 could be stripped and cleaned in minutes, its parts few and rugged. Soldiers valued its reliability as much as its firepower. It was not glamorous, but it did what it was designed to do: put bullets downrange, steadily and relentlessly. By the end of the Philippine campaign, Japanese commanders no longer dismissed the grease gun as a crude imitation of finer weapons. It had proven its worth in every environment: jungle, swamp, and city street, forcing the Japanese to fight battles on terms they could not control. The once-mocked weapon had become a nightmare in their reports, a machine that erased advantages of terrain and training with the simple logic of unending fire. As the war ground on into 1945, the M3 grease gun's role expanded beyond frontline infantry. Armored crews discovered it was the perfect companion inside the cramped interiors of tanks. Compact and lightweight, it could be stored in tight spaces and quickly brought to bear if a crew had to abandon their vehicle or defend it against infiltrators. Reports from the European front often mentioned tankers firing their grease guns out of hatches at close-range attackers, and the same held true in the Pacific. Japanese infantry frequently tried to swarm American armor with explosives strapped to poles or suicide charges. The stubby grease gun, fired in bursts from an open turret or hatch, proved invaluable in breaking up these desperate assaults. For the men sealed in steel, its simple reliability was a comfort in the chaos of battle. Paratroopers, too, came to rely on it. Dropping into Luzon and later Okinawa, airborne troops valued the weapon's folding wire stock and ease of handling. Unlike the heavier Thompson, the M3 could be carried on a jump without weighing down its user, and once on the ground, it offered rapid firepower in the scattered, disorganized skirmishes that defined airborne operations. Veterans remembered the clack of the bolt and the weapon's peculiar weight, ungainly at first, yet forgiving when it mattered most. Meanwhile, Japanese soldiers clung to doctrine that emphasized precision rifle fire and bayonet charges. These tactics, forged in earlier wars against China and Russia, were ill-suited to confront squads bristling with automatic weapons. The few Type 100s in service could not compensate for the overwhelming firepower carried by every American platoon. Ammunition shortages further crippled Japanese units. While American supply lines fed their grease guns with endless boxes of .45 ACP, Japanese garrisons often rationed cartridges, forced to make each burst count. The contrast was devastating. U.S. soldiers described firefights in which enemy guns fell silent after a minute, their owners already conserving precious rounds, while the Americans pressed forward with magazines still full. Okinawa revealed this disparity on a massive scale. In caves and tunnels honeycombing the ridges, Japanese defenders fought with fanatical determination. Yet the Americans answered with discipline, combining grenades, flamethrowers, and grease guns. Infantry squads advanced systematically, pouring fire into every dark opening before engineers followed with explosives. Survivors from the Japanese side admitted later that the unending sound of automatic fire wore them down as much as hunger and bombardment. Each burst from a grease gun was a reminder that America's war machine never ran dry. By now, the weapon's reputation had spread far beyond the battlefield. Captured examples were examined by Japanese officers who were struck not by its elegance but by its stark efficiency. They noted how few machining steps were required, how quickly it could be assembled, and how cheaply it was produced, What they once dismissed as crude now appeared terrifyingly practical. In the final months of the war, mocking laughter had long since turned to grim recognition. The grease gun was not a gimmick. It was the symbol of a nation that had turned its factories into forges of victory. The war's closing chapters confirmed what the Pacific campaigns had already proven. The M3 grease gun was more than a stopgap weapon. It was the natural evolution of America's philosophy of industrial war. At Iwo Jima, Marines clawed their way across volcanic ash under ceaseless fire, often reduced to small groups fighting block by block. Here the grease gun came into its own. Veterans remembered moving through blasted trenches, firing short, controlled bursts into the sulphurous haze, the heavy .45 rounds slamming enemies backward. In tunnels carved into the rock, the weapon's compact profile allowed soldiers to maneuver in suffocating darkness, where rifles were clumsy and bayonets nearly useless. The Japanese fought with ferocity, but the combination of American firepower, logistics, and discipline steadily bled them dry. Even at Okinawa, the bloodiest battle of the Pacific, the grease gun held its ground. With kamikaze attacks raging in the skies and massed defenses entrenched underground, every yard of progress was bought dearly. Yet the same story repeated, where American squads advanced with a mix of rifles, bars, and submachine guns. Japanese defenders had little to answer with beyond courage and dwindling supplies. The few Type 100s that appeared were prized by their users but insignificant in number. Against thousands of grease guns shipped across the Pacific, they were drops in an ocean. By June 1945, as Okinawa finally fell, the lesson was undeniable. The mockery that once surrounded the M3 had been silenced by hard reality. The grease gun's impact extended beyond the battlefield. It revealed how war had changed. No longer could nations rely solely on finely crafted arms built for elite soldiers. Victory demanded weapons that could be produced in staggering quantities, handed to ordinary men, and maintained under the harshest conditions. America had grasped this truth instinctively. While Germany and Japan pursued intricate designs that strained their resources, the United States embraced simplicity without sacrificing effectiveness. The grease gun epitomized this philosophy. Cheap, functional, and backed by endless production lines, it ensured that every squad had the firepower to dominate close combat. When the war ended, the M3 did not disappear. It traveled with American forces into Korea, into Vietnam, and into conflicts across the Cold War. Tank crews carried it as late as the Gulf War. Its reliability still trusted decades after its conception. Its longevity underscored its genius. A weapon built in haste for a global conflict that continued serving in new wars long after its critics had faded. The Japanese Type 100, meanwhile, was quietly shelved, remembered as a weapon too rare, too underpowered, and too late to matter. In hindsight, the grease gun story is not just about steel and bullets. It is about perception and reality, about how an enemy's sneer can mask a deep misunderstanding of what wins wars. The Japanese mocked the M3 because it lacked elegance, but elegance does not win when nations fight for survival. Factories, supply chains, and adaptability do. And in the hands of American soldiers, the grease gun delivered that truth with every burst. The weapon they dismissed as a garage tool became the instrument that shredded their defenses, erased their tactics, and shattered their illusions. On battlefields from Saipan to Okinawa, the M3 grease gun wrote its legacy in fire and thunder, proving beyond doubt that in the crucible of war, it is not appearances that matter, but effectiveness. The laughter of 1942 had given way to silence by 1945. The grease gun had spoken, and its voice was final.